Do you see career coaching as something that only high performers get? The sort of thing that's only made available to people who are expected to move into senior management positions? Or is career coaching something that can benefit anybody who wants it, no matter what your level of seniority, no matter what your trajectory is in your organisation? If you think career coaching should be made available to everyone and you'd like to find out how you can make that happen, then this is the episode you need to listen to. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, where we're all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. Regular listeners will know I'm a big fan of coaching in general, and especially when it comes to your career. I've been coached myself, and it's been an incredibly valuable experience, which I might talk about more on the podcast in the future. Now, you might think of being coached as something you do in your own time outside of your place of work. But what if coaching was offered at work and the coaches were your colleagues? In fact, what if your workplace wanted you to train to be a coach yourself? That's exactly what my guest this week has done. Philippa Kindon works in business development for a healthcare software company, and she is also a coach within her organisation. Philippa also holds a PhD in identity in the workplace. Philippa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jeremy.
So, Philippa, can you start by telling us a bit more about the organisation you work for and this dual role you have in both business development and as an internal coach?
Will do. Thanks very much. So, as you say, we're a health tech company. We're based in the southwest in Bath. We've got about 100 employees now. I think it might have just tipped over through recent recruitment. And the company itself has actually been running for about 21 years. And I've worked for them for nearly 5 years. It's an owner-managed business, so the founding director is still very much involved in the day-to-day. And yeah, it's a super organisation. Very proud to work for it.
And what's your role? What does business development mean for you?
The role I undertake, as you say, it's in a business development capacity. It involves, I'm very lucky to get involved in lots of different aspects of that, but most recently in what we call market discovery. So we've identified that actually it's time for us to diversify and grow into new markets, both at home and abroad. So the role I've most recently been fulfilling is in identifying what some of those potential opportunities could be. And then previously to that, and that sort of, part of my role that's ongoing, we call it program management. And it can basically be any particular area of the business that, needs some project support. That's varied over the years. Both internal and external sort of facing opportunities there that I've fulfilled in the business.
Cool. Well, certainly sounds like it gets you busy. So the internal coaching program, I mean, how long has that been a feature in your company?
That's a really good question. So it's when I first joined the company nearly 5 years ago, they were just beginning to roll it out across the whole business, but it had actually been ongoing among the software developers. So our organisation had adopted a particular framework called Agile, and within that, the scrum methodology, which I can go into a little bit more if helpful. But essentially, the software developers had been rolling out a coaching program probably for about 7 or 8 years from now. And then, as I say, about 5 years ago, the organisation realised that it had been going so well within the software development teams that they decided it would be a good idea to roll that out to the whole business. And it came hand in hand with rolling out self-managing teams to the rest of the business as well. Because what they essentially realised is that whilst people are very can be very enthusiastic about self-managing and flatter structure, which, again, I can speak in a bit more detail about. There are certain things that that can be missing if you don't have that traditional sort of hierarchy and line manager. Some of the roles and functions that the line manager plays can be quite coaching. Quite coaching-like. And so they, decided it was time to have a more formal coaching program within the organisation.
So the Agile Scrum, which I've kind of heard of, but don't really know what it's about, is that kind of similar to this idea of a flat structure? Is it related, or am I kind of off the wrong tangent there?
No, it is related. It is about teams being autonomous and accountable to one another, and to committing to the work that they're doing in such a way that you take on the work that you know you can fulfill and achieve in a given time frame. And in our organisation, that given time frame is 2 weeks. And they're called sprints. And so the autonomous Scrum team essentially commit to the work they're going to do in a given 2-week period. And then that's their commitment to one another and to the organization. So it does go very much hand in hand with self-managing teams. The Agile and Scrum is a huge area of project management. It's an incredible alternative to things like waterfall project management. I certainly wouldn't say I'm an expert in it in any shape or form, but if it's something you want to know a bit more about, I can definitely put you in touch with some people who can talk with you at great length about some of the pros and cons of working in an agile way.
So the flat structure more generally in your organisation. So what did it look like before? What does it look like now? And what was the motivation for the change?
Ooh, right. Okay. It's grown. So the organisation's grown quite typically for a small business over several years, quite organic growth. And when the organisation reached about sort of 20 to 30 employees, the traditional route started to be followed in terms of implementing middle managers. So it had always been run. It started literally as a sort of a 3-person organisation, and it grown very slowly, very organically, and had a great sort of family feel to it. And then as it got bigger, that sort of push for adding bureaucracy, adding lines of management, adding sort of command and control, that push was there. But the founding director, who has some really interesting sort of values and an ethos and a desire to run businesses in a different way, was feeling increasingly uncomfortable about this implementation of middle managers. And what they were also finding was that the software development teams who had implemented the Agile and the Scrum methodology were absolutely flying. They were really enjoying their work. They'd made some great improvements over releasing their work to the end customer. And through a very interesting conversation between the founding director and one of the other directors at the time, they realised that they had quite a lot in common about wanting to run a business in a different way, really not wanting to go down that traditional hierarchical sort of pyramid hierarchical route. And one of the key books or motivations for their way of thinking is a book called Maverick. Now, this book called Maverick, it's by a chap called Ricardo Semler, and it has been around for years. And one of our directors had been to a talk by Ricardo Semler when she was a management trainee in the NHS. And essentially, this book is about an organisation's journey into self-managing. And she thought to herself, this, at the time, this is absolutely incredible. What an inspiring, things can be done in a different way. But as she says, over time, it sort of became one of those talks that she went to as a graduate management trainee, and it had been forgotten. And then this conversation with our founding director sort of awakened all of that in her again, as they realized that actually they had a great opportunity to not go down the traditional route of implementing line managers and middle managers and a pyramid structure. And that, this was their opportunity to make some changes. And so I think a lot of it stemmed from that sort of, meeting of minds of the two directors there, and just that desire to do things in a different way.
So what are the advantages, or at least what were the perceived advantages of adopting this type of structure rather than the traditional hierarchical command and control structure?
Yeah. Okay. So certainly they'd already seen quite a lot of the advantages among the software developers. So they'd seen more commitment to their work, more commitment to teamwork. They were certainly getting better results in terms of releasing. So with software development, they release their updates to the customer and to the software, and they were getting a much faster turnaround, much less errors, much greater customer satisfaction. So the advantages of this flatter structure, self-managing teams was being very well realized among the software developers. And they thought a similar thing would happen when they rolled it out to the rest of the business. And this was a bit of a tricky time and a bit of a surprising time for the company. It was actually at this point that I joined the organization, is when they did roll it out, it had a lot of struggles. And you talked about, well, what are some of the disadvantages of working this way? What they found is that actually employee satisfaction started to take a dip, and the rest of the company who were not software developers weren't realizing the same kind of benefits. There wasn't that autonomy. There wasn't an increase in job satisfaction. And as it was at the time, they still had an exec team at the time who sort of took a look at the employee satisfaction results. And they weren't satisfied with what they saw. They started to see a dip in those results, and they wanted to challenge themselves. And they felt, they knew it was perhaps connected to this rollout of self-managing teams, but they really wanted to try and figure out why. So each year the company does a staff day, and what they've done beforehand is they've done some workshops looking at the values of the company, and they've gone out to all the teams and said, how does the company live well by its values? How does the company not live well by its values? And what they did as this staff days, they actually looked at all of the answers to how are we not living well by our values, and really started to connect that with this dip in staff satisfaction, started to pinpoint some of the areas that were not working so well due to this perhaps rollout of self-managing teams that hadn't been done with the full buy-in of the organization. So whereas the software developers, it had very much come from them internally driving it, for the rest of the company, it was a little bit like, where's this coming from? And how do we make it work? What we actually identified, and we did this, I have to say, as a whole company. So not just the exec team, the whole company as one of our staff days, and there was about 60 of us at the time, looked at all these results, all of this data, and came up with 12 different themes, 12 different areas that the business needed to work on to make this new way of working effective. A couple of the ones that I remember at the time was around decision making, for example. If you don't have a line manager, how do you decide, what gets done, or who makes the decision, or what if there's something quite tricky that we're trying to figure out here? If you don't have that line manager, basically, who gets to make the decisions?
Wow, there is so much in there. So presumably one of these 12 things that needed to change led to the idea that you needed some kind of coaching. Can you talk a little bit about what the thought process was and what was identified as missing that coaching was expected to solve?
Yeah, definitely. Exactly as you say, there was some great things about more traditional organisations that did feel a bit missing. So when obviously for all of us in our careers, sometimes we reach crossroads, we reach points of progression, or things that are a bit tricky. Now, what we do in our organisation is we encourage those conversations to be had with your team. And generally 9 times out of 10 with a high trust team, those conversations can be had. But sometimes there are things that are very personal, that might be slightly trickier, that people really want to have the space and the time and the headspace to talk through with somebody else. And what we found, the reason that we turned to coaching for that specific area is there are certain tools and principles around coaching that make it quite unique. And let's say quite different from something like mentoring or consultancy or therapy or line managing. And we felt that coaching really gave individuals that needed that time in that headspace the opportunity to explore some of those more difficult questions. And also, self-managing does require a really good degree of self-awareness. It asks a lot of the employees in the organisation, and to ask people to dig deep in an organisational context, they have to be very well in touch with themselves and how they operate, and have a really good sort of degree of self-reflection. And coaching again gives those opportunities for people to explore sort of how they operate, and in a very safe and confidential space.
It's really interesting how you said that coaching can be different to lots of other things like mentoring, therapy, and line management. I mean, it sounds like this is something which could have a place not just in an organisation which has a flat structure, as you described, but any organisation, even one with a sort of traditional hierarchical structure where you do have line managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can sit alongside in a more traditional organisation. In fact, one of the bodies that we have been along to conferences to kind of help ourselves improve in our coaching practice is a federation called the International Coaching Federation, and they run conferences. And what we've noticed whilst we've been going to the conferences, which has been about 4 years now, is they now even have a track for talk specifically for internal coaches, because what we're finding is this role of the internal coach is becoming a much better recognised role, and it does have some very specific challenges and opportunities that are different to being a coach that perhaps comes from outside of the organisation. So yeah, it can definitely run in more traditional companies as well.
Talk a little bit more about that distinction between internal and external, and why your company went the way of having internal coaches, so employees within the organisation, rather than getting or arranging access to external coaches, so that employees could have these difficult conversations and these difficult thought processes about understanding yourself.
Yeah, sure. Probably we're saying it is so we have both internal coaches and access to external coaches. It's not sort of completely either or, but our model definitely is around building our internal coach capacity. So there's a few reasons for that. One being, if you're going to make coaching available to everybody in the organisation, and we do say it is available to anybody who wants it. It's not mandated. You don't have to have it. But if you put your hand up and say you'd like a coach, then, the answer is yes, and we'll make that happen. What you find in but many organizations is that coaching is reserved for the the top performers, shall we say, the people who have been identified as the ones that will succeed, get to the top of the organization. And actually, that's not in keeping with our ethos and our values of, everybody matters, everybody counts, everybody brings value, everybody deserves to kind of achieve their full potential. And if you have been lucky enough to benefit from coaching, which Jeremy, I know you have, you know how powerful it can be about unlocking potential, about overcoming limiting beliefs. We just believe that should be available to everybody in the organization. Now, it is true to say that external coaching can be quite expensive, and perhaps that's why it has generally been limited to those top performers, shall we say, for want of a better word. But you can make it a lot more accessible and a lot more affordable, even for an SME like we are, small, medium-sized enterprise, if you can provide that as an internal resource. Now, we have put all of our internal coaches through training. So you can't just, turn up to work one day and say, I'm going to be a coach now. You do have to have the basic training that's delivered by a certified coach, so somebody that has been certified by the body I mentioned, the ICF. So we know that they're trained to the proper standards that would be recognised, and then they've been running a 1 or 2 day introductory course for anybody that wants to be a coach in our organisation. But then you don't have to be. You can go through the training and then decide that it's not right for you, and that's absolutely fine. It's not right for everybody. Not everybody wants to be a coach. And then what we also do is we offer refresher training, and most recently and really excitingly, we have now just started to really push ourselves to the next level in our coaching, and we have formalized the program. We've got a series of 15 modules that we're rolling out to the coaches over the next 6 months in 2-hour bite-sized chunks. So we're really embracing this coaching, internal coaching model. But what I would also say is the other reason we're very keen to keep it in-house, largely in-house. As I say, not to say you can't access an external coach if you feel that is something that is desperately needed or wanted, is about having a coaching culture. So everybody in the organisation, whether they are a formally trained coach or not, has had training on coaching styles, coaching questions, because actually we all have an opportunity to coach one another in the day-to-day. And we're sort of building up that coaching culture as well as the coaching program.
So this coaching culture training, this is something which every member of staff gets.
Yep.
Fantastic. When it came to introducing this internal coaching program, and presumably there was a call out for anyone who's interested in being a coach, sign up here. What was the take up like? I mean, was it reluctance? Was it a few people, or did everyone go, yep, sign me up?
It was probably somewhere in the middle. There was a good number. Now, the day that I did, I think there were about 12 of us. And at the time, as I say, we were about 60 employees, and there were already a handful of coaches in the business at that point. We are now up to, I think, maybe about 20 trained coaches for an organisation of 100. And everybody that signs up to be trained as a coach signs up very enthusiastically. It isn't something you can do reluctantly. So, it's.
What was your motivation for signing up?
That's a good question. I guess it just spoke to me. In some ways, it just spoke to me. What I realise now in hindsight, and people tell me as well, is I've got generally a natural coaching style. I've before starting work where I am now, I've worked for several different organisations. Mostly on the smaller side. I have worked in some larger corporates. But what I have always felt quite uncomfortable with is the idea of telling other people what to do. I genuinely believe that we all have our own answers. Obviously, when it comes to professional training, Of course, you need to, do the right programs and courses and get trained up in your profession. But when it comes to making decisions about yourself and for yourself, that's time to look inwards. I just felt that this was a great opportunity to explore something that had probably always been an interest to me, but had never been sort of formally presented as an opportunity. So I just jumped at the chance.
Did you have any expectations when you first signed up? And if you did, how were those expectations met or not? What came as a surprise?
I suppose I did. I'd been very lucky to have had some coaching from off the back of a course that I'd done with a previous employer. So it'd been a sort of a personal development course that I'd done over several weeks, and then you could sign up to get the support of a coach after the course. And it blew me away to be asked such challenging questions in such a helpful way, and to feel that person sat over the other side of the table to you, was completely on your side and wanted the very best for you, but wasn't just going to agree with you. Oh, yes, that must have been very hard. Or, of course, you were right in that circumstance. They are going to challenge you, but for all the right reasons. And I guess in terms of expectations of being trained as a coach, I wanted to get under the skin of how do you do that? What are the tools? What are the techniques? What is it that enables somebody to have that presence? In coaching, we talk about having a coaching presence. And you know it when you're with a good coach. It's a very particular connection that can start to flow between coach and coachee if it's working well.
So what does the internal coaching role look like, and how does it interact with, if you like, the day job?
Yeah, great question. So once you've been through your training as an internal coach, and you've said, yes, this is something I'd like to do for the business, you're essentially added to a bank of coaches. Your profile then sits on our intranet, and you write a little bio about who you are and what your motivation for coaching is, and if you've got any particular areas that you feel you can be helpful to people. And then employees will put their hand up and say, yes, I'd like to access the services of a coach. We have a program manager for the coaching program, and she sort of administers all of that process. So as an employee, you would say, I'd like to have the services of a coach. You pick 3 that you would be happy to work with. And then there's a bit of a matchmaking process in terms of judging who's got capacity of the people that you'd like to work with, and then you get underway. So we have very importantly, you have a coaching commitment, a coaching contract between the coach and the coachee that outlines, the basic rules of engagement in terms of confidentiality, the broad area that you're going to work on, probably some time limit. People sometimes come with a very specific issue that they want to address. And you might say, right, this is a month, or, this is a couple of months. Where for others, it's more of an ongoing, longer term relationship that can last, maybe even a year or 2 years. But yeah, importantly, it starts with that coaching commitment and the contract between coach and coachee. So you both know sort of what you're signing up for.
And how, when you as coach have this role, do you manage it alongside your other commitments to the business?
Yeah. So 2 things. One is obviously being a self-managing organization, it is up to you to manage your time. You and working to sprints and in your teams, as we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you commit to the work for your team in your sprint. Now, if you know that you've got 2 or 3 coaches and, at least one of them is going to be, featuring in your 2-weekly calendar, then you would say to in my case, the business development team or the market discovery team, I know I've definitely got 2 hours that I have to commit to coaching in this sprint. So you take that time, and that is for your coachee, and you say to your team, this is my capacity for these 2 weeks. So it's up to you as the individual to manage your balance of the day job and the coaching commitment. And what we also have is completely transparent diaries. So everybody in the organization can see everybody else's calendar. You can request a meeting with anybody else, and it populates as a request. So my coachees can look into my diary and see, where there's a space. And for some people, they like to just have a regular slot every month or every other week. And we just, easily stick to that. And other people prefer to be on a bit of an ad hoc basis. So it's a combination of sort of that self-managing, working in sprints, and completely, transparent diaries. And that's how we manage it.
And does that self-managing apply also to the coachees, in the sense that the business does expect that people will do coaching and they will do it during working hours, so that, it's not something that you're expected to do, you've got to do it before work or after work or over lunchtime?
No, it is on company time. So the company allows for that time. I think it's important because it is company sanctioned, it's company supported. Sometimes people will choose to do it over their lunchtime. They may choose to go out to a local cafe and get away from the office environment. There's no expectation that it's done outside of work. And I think what is interesting is when you give people the responsibility and autonomy over their own work and their own progression, they use it wisely. You don't find people taking the mick and, we're just going to go and take a 3-hour lunch break and have a nice chat. There is an expectation that the coaching itself will deliver value, and we, will regularly survey the coachees to make sure that the having access to coaching is making a difference, and we consistently find that it is.
On that, talk a bit more about what the results have been as a result of this internal coaching program.
Yeah. So one of the biggest areas that we've seen and people say things have improved in is confidence. It has been absolutely amazing to see people kind of, when they're asked where has coaching made the biggest impact for you, many people will cite improved confidence as being an outcome, which is just amazing. As a coach, that is probably one of the most exciting things to think that you might actually be helping somebody to feel more confident at work, to feel better at work, to feel happier at work. That's been a clear outcome from the coaching.
And how does the business measure the success of the coaching program?
So this is, we're literally this autumn, we're actually having a big look at that. And it's not just us that finds it tricky. We've spoken to our colleagues at the ICF about this and sort of delved into resources. Because of the confidentiality of coaching, it is really tricky to both the confidentiality and the personal individual nature of it. Everybody brings something a different challenge to coaching, or they want to get something slightly different out of it. And it is hard to quantify, really hard to quantify. But my colleague, Michelle, that's sort of running the coaching program at the moment and really leading on that, she is making that her absolute sort of driving force over this autumn season, is to figure out how can we show the value of this coaching, because we know it from the survey results that we get, we know it from anecdotally what people say to us, but we feel it's actually time to really try and quantify that.
So does the business have a particular motivation for finding out this value? I mean, is this something which could lead it to stopping the internal coaching, or is it kind of it's going to carry on anyway, but it would like to have some harder evidence of the value? Can you talk a bit more about that?
I think it is much more likely the second thing that you've just said there. We're now up to over 50% of staff have opted to be coached. And the survey, the anecdotal evidence is overwhelmingly positive. So I can't imagine that the outcome would be, we're going to stop the coaching program. And in fact, the opposite decision has been made. The company's set aside, for a company of our size, a reasonably substantial budget to invest in the coaching. As I mentioned, there's some formal training to top up our basic training. We pay to attend the conferences to make sure that we keep our sort of coaching professional development up. So I don't think it's ever likely to not happen. I think it's more about how do we need to progress it from here? There are very specific challenges around being an internal coach. We've already mentioned a couple of them, like managing time, managing confidentiality. You can just imagine, in one session, you're coaching somebody who is bringing their, sometimes quite personal and potentially sensitive discussion points to a coaching session. And the next day you're in a team meeting with them where you're discussing sales results. So, you do have to be really clear about, which hat you're wearing and always keeping that vault. We talk about sort of coaching being in a vault. But I think it's about recognizing how do we get the most value from the coaching so that it continues to make the difference that we need it to in the organization.
This leads very nicely on to my next question, which is, if there's someone listening to this who thinks, oh my goodness, this sounds amazing, I would love to have this at my place of work, how can that person start the ball rolling? Who do they speak to? And how do they persuade the right people that there is merit in this and that it's going to have a cost attached to it, but that it's a cost worth bearing?
I guess, first of all, I would be more than happy to have a chat, with anybody that's interested in finding out a bit more about sort of how you can start those conversations. But I think it comes from, very often an organization will have at least some form of an HR function, some kind of HR human resources department, people and culture department, or, somebody in the business that looks after the people. So my advice would be start with them. Coaching isn't new in terms of people management. I guess what will be important is if you want to make a start on this and do it in a different way, do it in a way that you recognize that coaching can be of value to anybody in the organization. It is about starting with HR. You do need the support of decision makers, of budget holders. I accept, most organizations are not flat. They're not self-managing. There will be sort of management structures and hierarchies to navigate. But there's no doubt, and there's plenty of case studies available online to show, what value coaching can bring. But generally, start with the sort of the people management side of the business and speak to them about it.
I think the case studies are probably going to be very, very important here, because so many organizations just have this, as you described, coaching is just for the high flyers. It's for the people who expect to be promoted and to the executive team. And you're quite right that does suggest that everyone else's career, everyone else's, worth to the company is maybe not quite as much. So it's overcoming that hurdle. It's persuading the business, look, there's going to be merit in coaching the high flyers, but you are going to see results if you coach everyone. That's got to be the bit you've got to present. It's showing that that it has positive results and that it is, a return on investment.
Yeah, very much so.
I mean, on that, I know that your kind of experience of this is largely limited to where you are, but I mean, are there any particular types of organizations where an internal coaching model is particularly valuable? And I suppose the counter to that is, are there any types of organization which it's maybe not so useful, or it doesn't lend itself so much to having an internal coaching system?
So having experienced the value of coaching, both as a coachee and as a coach, I find it hard to imagine there being any scenario or any workplace setting that wouldn't benefit from having access to coaching. I think being able to have an internal coaching program, there does need to be perhaps very clear ground rules. At the end of the day, the employer is paying for that time. The employer is paying for the coach's time, the coachee's time. You've got to recognize there are three parties in that relationship. The employer is expecting, whether it be improved performance or better team working, there is an expectation, like you say, that there should be some return on investment. But for a coaching session to work, the content of it must be confidential. That coachee must feel complete trust in the coach of that vault, of that, what we discuss in this session doesn't then get, taken to the line manager or the boss, whatever your particular setup is. So I think there's something about culture in there and high trust. As long as the ground rules are there, I imagine internal coaching could work and could be valuable in all organizational settings.
Leaving aside whether someone might be able to persuade their organization to have an internal coaching practice or whatever it might be, if someone has listened to you and thinks, wow, that sounds brilliant, I'd love to get involved, where can someone start to find out whether coaching might be right for them?
Okay. As I mentioned before, one of the key resources that we've tapped into is the ICF, the International Coaching Federation. So, that is a huge organization. It's worldwide. If you reach out for coaching resources, training courses, case studies, conferences, if you go to that kind of as a starting point, that you're going to get, credible, professional support and access to the resources that you might need. But what we have also found is some great local resources. So, for example, in our area, there's in Bath, there's something called the Future Talent Programme. And, that's a voluntary organisation, I think, with charitable status. And they essentially invite local organisations to nominate delegates to attend. I think it's something like a 3-month programme, and they get access to coaches through that. So that, again, there's a bank of local coaches that are a great resource. There's groups on LinkedIn. So I think once you just get started on that, you find, there's some amazing resources that you can tap into that can really help you on a coaching journey. Brilliant.
And if anyone does want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah. So I'd love to hear from anybody that's got more questions about this and wants to hear about our experience in the organisation I work for. So I am emailable. Can I give you an email address?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Super. So it's philippa.kindon@mayden.co.uk. And we're really happy to speak to anybody that's got questions about coaching, that's got specifically internal coaching programs, has got questions about self-managing, have got questions about agile and scrum. These are things that we've been running for, close to a decade, certainly the agile side of the business now. And we find actually we're really happy to share our journey. We call it warts and all, because we find it really frustrating when you're looking for resources and things are sanitized and you get, this is the answer to everything. That is never the case. There are always pros and cons in whatever routes you choose. And we've made mistakes along the way. But we're really happy to share with anybody that's got a genuine interest in sharing our wisdom and learning from others as well. So just really welcome those conversations.
Brilliant. And Mayden, that's Mayden. Is that right? So
it is, yes.
Philippa.Kindon at mayden.co.uk. Cool. As I say, I'll link to that in the show notes. Well, Philippa, thank you so much for this conversation. Absolutely fascinating. I hope it's inspired some people to take this forward. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely to speak to you again. Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Philippa Kindon. It won't surprise you to hear that I am massively in favour of what Philippa's company Mayden is doing for their employees in terms of making coaching available to everyone. It's not to say that people should be forced to get career coaching, but having it available for those who want it, that really sends out a signal that every employee matters, not just the senior people or those who are on the fast track to leadership. And as Philippa and I discussed, I don't think this is something which you could only have in the context of a company with a flat structure that doesn't have a line management system in place. I thought it was really telling how Philippa described that over 50% of staff at Mayden have opted to receive coaching. It's clearly something which people value, and I just can't see how it won't make a positive difference, even if that's something that might be tricky to measure. So if this is something which sounds like it might be a good fit for your company, I hope you've been inspired to start talking to the right people, maybe to think about implementing it. As usual, there's full show notes at changewhatlife.com/119. That's changewhatlife.com/119. And this is one of those episodes I'd really love you to share. I mean, I'd like you to share all the episodes, but this one in particular, if you've got any friends that work in HR or learning and development, then why not send them a link to this episode, see what they think. There's another great interview coming up next week, so subscribe to the show if you haven't already, and I can't wait to see you in next week's episode. Cheers. Bye.